Welcome, everybody, back to our regular Sunday interview here on the Veil of Sound. And by clicking on the title, you already know that I am ticking off a bucket list item for me. I have the pleasure of interviewing one of the lads from the Jesus Lizard. So, Mac McNeilly, thanks for joining.
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it very much.
I'm very happy to have you on the show. And sometimes my research for interviews leads me down rabbit holes. And I have to ask one thing first before I forget. Is it true that you played drums on a Come album in 1996?
Yes, I think it was an EP.
Near Life Experience?
Right, Near Life Experience. And I played on half of that record, 4 songs. I think there were 8 songs total. And it was a very fun experience. I love those guys. And it was just a lot of fun. It was very easy to do. We rehearsed a few times and then went in and recorded. And it was just a lot of fun. Yeah.
And if anybody wants to know a little bit more about what one of the members of Come is doing nowadays, just visit our archive. Back in June, we had an interview with Talia Tzadek and her new band E. So it's a wonderful chance of bringing stuff together.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, and it's also great music. I mean, like the last E album is really, really good. But the first thing that I usually always ask, and I do not want to forget, is do you have any kind of band merch, shirt, album that maybe you bought recently that you would like to plug here? I'll give you a moment and I'll plug something that I like to do. My friends in that wonderful Swiss black metal meets noise band Rockall. So if anybody wants to hear the most terrifying thing out there, that's your choice.
Well, I'll have to get those recommendations from you after we finish this because I want to find out what you're listening to also.
So, do you have any maybe record that you bought recently that you would like to plug here at this moment?
I've lately been listening to more older things, things that either I missed the first time around or particular records that I may have some other albums by that artist, but I don't have a particular one. So I'm just kind of revisiting things. Right. Lately, I've been listening to a lot of African Cuban drumming, and I really like that. Even revisiting a lot of Fela Kuti's long form songs. Just love that stuff. It's a lot of fun and get a lot of good percussive ideas from that too. Not necessarily ones that I would translate to the band, but just it's all input. So it's great to be exposed to different things, not just typical rock music or and I like jazz too. Occasionally, listen to some of the more like traditional jazz music. So going back in time and listening to some of those things, but nothing in particular, that I can.
It's interesting that you've mentioned or that you just dropped that rock word, because listening to the music of the Jesus Lizard, I mean, of course, it is noise rock. I think if we had to put a badge on it, it's noise rock, right? But when trying to find out some of the instruments, when figuring out Dwayne's guitar style or the way that you and David form the rhythm section, would you agree that, yes, it is noise, but you combine a whole hell of a lot of influences on your records?
Yes, I would say that it's, I know that we get sort of put in this category of noise rock, but I don't think that we're very conscious of being a part of that or not being a part of that. It's just sort of a name that it's a reference point, so people have a general idea what you're talking about, I think, and that's fine. But I think more than that, for us, I think we're really just a rock band, and it's a certain flavor of rock, and it's fairly abrasive, and it can be very aggressive, but it's still, when you boil it down to it, it's very, very basic parts. So we
Hmm.
only have, one guitar, one bass, one drums, uh, and the three of us,
And a
do
somewhat
our thing.
strange singer.
Yes, yes, and a unique vocal stylist. Yeah, that's what I prefer to call him, and he would be the same way. But it's really just rock music, and we're older guys, so all grew up on what's referred to as classic rock, and
Yeah.
even before that, the Beatles and the Stones and all the British invasion bands that came along. That's what sort of got us interested in music, I think. At least I can speak for Dwayne. He and I follow a similar path as far as influences and what we got exposed to. And then once we became teenagers, growing up in Detroit, he had a little bit different, you know, than I did growing up in Atlanta. I had more Southern rock probably exposure. He had more Detroit Stooges, MC5 type of thing. But we really, I'll listen to a bunch of different things like progressive rock back in the 70s. And so there's a lot of things that go into it that we don't try to put into it. I think it just naturally comes out
Yeah.
that way. So I think we have a very good appreciation of rock music that is good when it's really simple and effective.
Hmm.
And we try not to put too much extra in that's not necessary.
Hmm.
So Dwayne is very good at coming up with riffs that are pretty lean. So not a lot of extra anything you don't
Yeah.
need. And then the arrangements we try to do the same way, where everything that is in the song is somehow necessary to us
Hmm.
when we're writing it. So it's not, just a bunch of like ear candy to distract you. It's
Hmm.
so sorry for the long answer, but
No,
that's
no, no, no. That's very fine, and it goes directly into what I was asking next. And I first want to point something out to people when you say like, trimming the fat and making stuff lean. None of the songs on the new record is longer than 4.5 minutes. So to make it clear, I mean, like we are still talking about a band that knows how to cut down stuff. Um, but the question then again is, how autark is the band in itself, not the singular members, but how autark from outside influences is the Jesus Lizard?
can you say that word again? How
Yeah,
what?
how independent?
Oh, how independent is the band from
Mhm.
outside influences?
Mhm.
Uh, well, I don't think that we exist in a vacuum. So we're not,
Mhm.
we are exposed to whatever we're listening to and everything that we have listened to before. But again, I think that's not so much a conscious holding of those
Mhm.
influences or music styles or artists. I think it's something that is just kind of baked in to each
Mhm.
one of us. And so whatever we bring to the band setting and whatever songs that we come up with is just kind of what happens when the three of us or four of us with David, what happens when we get together. It's not real deliberate or thought out or calculated. It's just whatever that is that we make that sound. It's what happens when we get together, and we're
Mhm.
lucky in that we don't have to try real hard to make it a Jesus Lizard record,
Mhm.
or make it a Jesus Lizard song. Some songs are stronger than others in the writing process, and the weaker ones you tend to either just throw away or put on a shelf or take apart from one of those that's good,
Mhm.
and incorporate that into writing a new song, but you don't want the rest of it. Uh, so besides that, which is a very deliberate process in the writing of it, I don't think, I'd say we are probably influenced by the things that we are currently listening to and other bands we play with, but I don't think it's such a big contribution to our sound. I think our
Mhm.
sound is pretty much where it's going to be because we've played with each other for so long.
That is interesting. It sounds as if the writing process for the band is a very natural one. It's the way you describe it. It seems as if you don't have to force anything.
Yes, it's yeah, I think we're very lucky that way in that uh, we all trust each other musically and we get along with each other very well. And so it's more like a family coming back together in the best parts, in the best ways of that, without a
Mhm.
lot of fighting or egos or problems that can come up with bands sometimes. There's no big agendas that any one of us individually have when we get together. I think we all want to make the whatever we do as best we can.
Mhm.
But there's nothing that any individual has invested in it to that's not for the greater good, I think, of the band, So
That is a wonderful thing to hear because I mean, like, I'm very sure you have been confronted with it or you've heard about it, that very many people take, for example, Mr. Yao as like a person who's very confident. But it seems as if you are describing a band of equals, which is, I think, after nearly 40 years, something very special, isn't it?
I think so very much. I'd say the whole writing process is very democratic. I think we appreciate each other's role in the band. So I don't have to worry or even think about it if Dwayne is going to come up with a good guitar part. I know he
Mhm.
will.
Mhm.
And, I think we all trust each other very much so that I think what we end up trying to do is each one of us bring the best thing we can bring to the song.
Mhm.
Um, and sometimes that takes a while to figure out. Sometimes in writing a song, we'll have it sound one way. We'll go back and listen to it and get together several more times, and then it sort of finds a life of its own. It sort of sheds its own skin like a snake. It sheds its own skin that it doesn't need, and
Mhm.
continually evolves into something where it settles in and it feels right. And pretty much all these songs on the new record, they happen pretty quickly like that. And I'd say that most of these songs, all of them really, were Dwayne or David Sims bringing a nugget of an idea in, or a chord combination, or a melody, maybe a couple of parts, and then presents it to the band. And then we come up with our parts, and then we'll take suggestions from each other and try things and then see if we like it or not. But this last record was very unusual for us because we ended up, well, the pandemic was going on.
Mhm.
So we didn't get together as much as we normally would have to write
Mhm.
it in person. So there was a lot of file sharing going back and forth where each of us would listen to what the others had come up with. And sometimes I would put drums onto a track that they had sent, and we all were using the same type of workstation sequencer, so we could send files back and forth really easily like that, and
Mhm.
sort of dial in a general idea what the song would sound like. Then we did get together a few times,
Mhm.
but it was the most unusual process in that way, in that we weren't in the same room. Like when the band was first going in the 90s, we were together all the time and writing always in the same room,
Mhm.
even if we weren't with our regular instruments, we'd get in the same room in a living room and go over these songs and the tapes and things like that. So it was very different this time.
Is that also now difficult or more difficult? Because I mean, like you're scattered across the US. I forgot where Mr. Sims is living, but I know Dwayne is living in Nashville, and I think David is living in LA. You're living in Chicago, if I remember correctly.
Right.
So you're scattered. So is that also making that whole songwriting process a little bit more difficult?
Well, it turns out it didn't really make it more difficult. It just presented a challenge in that it was a new way to work.
Mm-hmm.
So it was different, but I think we all trusted in the process of the way that we do come up with songs. So in that way, it all worked in the end. It was just a very unusual way for us to work, but that's what the situation was for so many people.
Mhm.
It forced people to do things differently. So, and it may have even been a good thing in some ways that may not be clear right now, and in that it presents challenges. So sometimes those limitations and challenges
Mhm.
can have good results as well.
Mhm.
You know,
Yeah, I can imagine. And I mean, like, you have not only recorded the 11 tracks for Rack, you've also recorded at least three more tracks for the upcoming
right.
Flux EP, which for everybody who doesn't know, it's going to be out on Record Store Day. So in April, you can get that. You can also already listen to the tracks. Wonderful, amazing work. So you've already recorded at least 14. I'm hoping that you're now going to say, okay, we have another album coming, but whatever. Um, but is that also a result of a certain joy of getting back together in the studio then, during or after the pandemic?
Yeah, I think so. I think there was, I think we were all very happy to be doing this again. And
Mhm.
we, you know, missed each other a lot. And I think we do genuinely enjoy each other's company
Mhm.
and the music we make. It's a lot of fun. And I think that's really the reason why we ended up writing these songs was not so much to put out a record and tour, although that's what you always want to happen. It was more like, this is going to be fun for us to do. Let's do this and see what happens. So
Mhm.
uh, we were very satisfied to uh, get together and rehearse these and then to actually record them and then listen back. And then once we were listening back to what we had, we knew that it was strong. And, at least by our standards, we
It
felt
is.
like it was good and that it was
Mhm.
worth putting out and that,
Mhm.
you can never tell how other people are going to react to it, but
Mhm.
all we have is ourselves to try to hold a certain level of expectation. And I
Mhm.
think we reached that with these songs and we were very happy with them. So then it became like, well, let's put it out and let's see about playing live again.
Mhm.
Because the last time we played live was right before the pandemic in a New Year's Eve show in New York
Mhm.
in 2019, the end of 2019. And so, we hadn't played with each other since that time. We really wanted to do that again. And we were just very lucky that everything fell into place and
Mhm.
worked out so well.
Could we maybe go so far as to say that the pandemic also sparked the interest in let's record some stuff and then see where it goes?
Yes, I think so. I think every one of us was feeling very isolated, and
Mm.
especially the first part of the pandemic was, there was a lot of fear because I think in general in populations because we didn't have any answers and we never experienced anything like this in our lifetime. So it was an unusual, uncharted time to be,
Yeah. And in
alive.
2020, you also had a president back then who knew exactly what to do.
Right, right. And yes. And yeah,
Yeah, but I know what you mean. I know what you mean. Um, you have spoken a lot now about the band as, like an emotional thing. I mean, like, you took a hiatus back in the late 90s from the Jesus Lizard and came back in the zeros for some live shows. First of all, how was it coming back? And second of all, does the band now offer more emotional stability that you, for example, also sometimes need?
well, one of the main reasons I had to step back in the late 90s was because I had a family situation that I felt like I was not really present. Well, I wasn't very present for my family because I was going out on the road quite a bit. And as more was demanded of the band, I felt that I owed it to the band to do that. but then at the same time, I
Mm.
needed to be there for my wife and young
Mm.
kids.
Yeah.
So it was a difficult situation. And in that way, it was very emotional because I think a lot of my identity back then was wrapped up in being a drummer and was
Mm.
being the drummer for the Jesus Lizard because that was so much a part of my life. The last few years before I stepped back out of that were very dense. There's a
Mm.
lot of band activity going on, a lot of records being recorded and toured on, and um, I think now it's just a different situation for me because I don't have that same family situation, and I
Mm.
have my wife who's very supportive, Jenny. She's has encouraged me to do this to get back with the band. And actually, when we first got
Mm.
back together in 2009, she was the one that really convinced me. She said, you know, you need to do this again because now you can have a different ending to it.
Mm.
It doesn't have to end with you having to reluctantly step away and feel like, you know, you're breaking your own heart because you can't do
Mm.
this anymore, or you don't feel like you should, or whatever it is. So that made a big difference, and I felt like I could really enjoy it with the support of my family.
Yeah.
And I think that I know that the other guys in the band realized that that was a very difficult time for me, and
Mm.
there were other issues going on too, personal issues that I had that I needed to work on, and so
Mm.
it was a good time for me to do some reflecting and work on myself. And through all of that, I think I came back as a better person and
Mm.
hopefully a better band member and friend and you know, player even, so a drummer.
Mm.
So it's sometimes things take unusual, unexpected turns to get you to a place that's better, you know, in the long run. So I think I'm very happy with that, you know.
And how was it to come back in 2009?
Oh, it
Did
was
you reach
so
out
much.
to the guys? Had you been in contact?
Well, I not hadn't been in much contact with them. There was a few times where there was no bad feelings like you
Mm.
might think. It wasn't like that. It was just that I fell out of contact with them, and I'd spoken with David Yao a couple of times, and occasionally I'd hear something from one of the guys, but it was more that I think our booking agent reached out to us because we had been offered a slot in Primavera, Barcelona,
Mm.
uh, or maybe it was one of the uh, British shows where they were doing that. It was in Minehead. Anyway, so they were saying, "Well, would you do this? Would you consider doing this?" And we all talked about it, and it seemed like the right time for me.
Mm.
And so once that became a reality, I was just overjoyed. It was great. It was, and since then, every time I tell people this all the time, they ask things like that. They'll say, "Well, what is it like being back doing this again, or whatever?" And I'll tell them
Mm.
the same thing. It's like being a little kid on Christmas morning getting to unwrap another present. It's just like every time we get to go on stage, I'm so grateful.
Mm.
And I mean that because you don't know how much time you have. You don't know what's going to
Mm.
happen next. And I think I have a real appreciation of the fact that we can make music still
Mm.
at whatever age we're at, which is I'm about to be 65 in a couple of days. So
You don't look any day younger
I
than
feel great.
64, so don't worry.
And it, you know, to me it's just a wonderful thing, and to
Mm.
be able to do it with these particular people who mean so much to me in
Mm.
my life, it's just an amazing thing. So I feel very grateful to be able to do this, you know.
Would you say you feel whole again?
Yeah, in a lot of ways, yes, because this is still a big part of me, and
Mm.
it's a huge way of how I make sense of the world,
Mm.
how I express myself. It's the language that I understand
Hmm.
besides the common native language that you grow up speaking.
Hmm.
Playing drums and playing music, this is what makes sense to me. So I'm very lucky and very grateful to be able to do it.
It's very interesting that you say like it's something that you understand, and you've been talking about Fela Kuti and other drummers. Would you say that you are able to understand rhythm-oriented people whose mother tongue you don't speak, but you still understand them through your music, through drumming?
That's a really interesting question. I've never thought about it quite in those terms, but that uh, I think that I would probably get along with those people very
Hmm.
well. Yeah, I don't think the language barrier is as much of a problem as people tend to think.
Hmm.
It doesn't have to be, at least, especially in music, because music is you've heard people say it's the world language. And it's kind of true. It's like you people don't need to be brought up a certain way in order to
Hmm.
enjoy a certain type of music. It's there for
Definitely.
everyone.
Yeah, and it's also a way that music is one of a few arts that, without having to think about it, can immediately, after a few seconds, give you an emotional lift
Oh
or
yeah.
something to think about. That's definitely true. Um, so how do you guys nowadays keep in contact? I mean, like we said, you're scattered. How do you keep in contact with the others?
Well, we have like a group messaging system that we
Ah,
use
okay.
quite a bit. So in fact, some of the other guys were on there today, and I didn't really have anything to contribute, but I glanced at it, and I know when they make a post. Excuse me. So,
No problem.
we'll keep in touch that way. Sometimes we'll send each
Mhm.
other silly things, or like news stories, or just but we don't usually just call each other on the phone. It's
Mhm.
more like typical of how people today, interact really quickly,
We,
like with a
yeah, yeah.
text message or something like that.
With a little plastic thing, right?
That's
Yeah,
it.
yeah,
That's
yeah,
it.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah. Our do
yeah.
all, do everything.
But I have to ask one thing that struck me. When will you get a name change? Because we have David Yao, David Sims, Dwayne Dennison, so it would be time for Dak McNeilly, wouldn't it?
Well, maybe, as long as it's a four-letter word,
Oh yeah, true.
I could probably go with that. Although,
But
since I'm sort of the goalie of the band, I can have
that's
like a
true.
different
That's
name, and I can have different, I can wear different things, and so
But when you've been talking about four letter releases, it's interesting. I mean, you still keep that going. I looked it up, apart from like several singles, which of course had the name of a track on it. There is only one Jesus Lizard release that doesn't have a four-letter word. Um, is that now like a running joke, or is it part of an aesthetic?
well, I don't think we take it that seriously, but I think we do like the consistency of it.
Hmm.
So it's not. I don't know how important that is really to any one of us, but I think since we've done it for so many releases, I think that why stop now, you know?
Hmm. Yeah. Let's talk about the Flux EP, which will be out in mid-April. You have those three singles that you've already pre-released. In November, it was Cost of Living, then in January, West Side, and now a few days ago, you've released I'm Tired of Being Your Mother. Um, how did you first of all know, okay, those are tracks that are not going to make it on rack, on the normal full length?
Well, I think that uh, we tend to go through a process of each one of us will write down the songs that we've recorded and which ones are our favorites.
Mhm.
So we'll do that individually, and then
Mhm.
without knowing what the other guys are going to write down. And so I think that's part of the process of what works out to be what's going to be on the record.
Mhm.
And then other ones just felt like they didn't either belong in the same collection,
Mhm.
or that they were better served as like a special separate thing. So it wasn't necessarily that these three songs were the worst ones or the ones we didn't like. It wasn't like that so much that it's more of like I just think we felt the others had more of a place together as a group, and
Mhm.
then these three tended to be some that felt like either they were a little more unusual or that they didn't belong in that group. So putting out a three-song EP was a good way to sort of kind of get those in their own group.
Something that is striking about Rec and about Flux, and that is a very, very awesome thing, is you have not developed or you have not turned into elder statesmen. For example, I love Einstürzende Neubauten. I love that band. But when you compare their newer releases with their older ones, the newer ones are calmer. They're a little bit more relaxed. With the Jesus Lizard and with Rack, the first full length after 26 years, it doesn't sound as if there are 26 years in between. It sounds as if it's like it's the next record by the same band who is, in a way, you've already said it, it's aggressive music in a way. Was that important for you to stay on that level of intensity?
Uh, well, I think, like I said earlier, I think you and I both touched on this a little earlier that when we get together as a band, whatever comes out is really just naturally what comes out.
Mm-hmm.
So we didn't have to say, okay, we have to make a really aggressive record.
Mm-hmm.
We need to make this record sound really, edgy and hard hitting, and there was none of that.
Mm-hmm.
So I think what happens when we get together and write songs is very natural. That's what comes out. But I'm glad to hear that because one thing we did not want to do, especially live, is get up on stage and have people go, "Oh, well, they were good back in the day and they're
Yeah.
really nice guys, but they just
Mm-hmm.
they just don't really have what they used to have." And like so we didn't want to do that. We didn't want to be old men trying. So we weren't going to do that. If we couldn't present not only the new songs but the older songs the way they needed to be presented live, we didn't want to play live. We didn't want to do this anymore. So we're not going to look the same if you as we looked back then. But I think the energy is still there, the musicianship is still there, and the desire to make an audience feel really alive and engaged with our music is still there.
Mm-hmm.
So I think really I have no complaints. I really at this stage of doing things, I think all of us are in good shape. We feel like we can all play our instruments as good, if not better, than we ever have before. Sometimes you make different choices as far as like we don't stay up till 4 and 5 in the morning and then get on the road at 8 in the morning and drive all day anymore. We
Mm-hmm.
don't want to do that. So we rest more, take care of ourselves more, probably eat
Mm-hmm.
better, sleep better. Don't do the drinking, like we, used to do back in the day. So it's just that part makes what we do now easier and better. So I think there's a conscious decision to uh, make whatever's working stay working, if that makes sense.
It does. And it's a very, very humble thing to say because basically you're saying, okay, we have not made a conscious but subconscious decision to do whatever it needs or whatever this band requires to keep what we had and put some new songs onto it. That's a very cool thing to say. I mean, it also says something about the band itself because it basically says, okay, we like what we do. We want to keep on doing it. And so I of course have to tease. Are these 14 tracks the last or are there You know what
Oh,
I mean?
well, I wouldn't say that they're the last. I would never say
Yes.
something like that. But I don't have anything concrete to tell you either,
No, 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 no,
because
no. But
we're so right into this whole thing. But personally, I would love to be able to write more and release more as long as it stays where everyone in the band is happy with it and we're enjoying it, and the people that like our band want to hear more. So I would never say this is the end.
mm,
So
no,
I
it's let's
you
put it other ways. It's the way that you seem to enjoy it so much that you're not going to say, okay, after this tour, it's going to be over.
Oh, no, I would never want to say that. I would always want to keep things open-ended because you never know. It's like I thought that I would never play with this band again after
Mm,
the 90s, and I thought, well, that's over, and I'm going to have to come to terms with that. And then I got a huge surprise by being able to do the tours we did in 2009 and then a few after that that were smaller. And now what we're doing now and is just I could never see that coming. So I'm very pleasantly surprised. Yeah, and happy about it.
I can see that. I wanna end with a quote by one of you who said that, or by one of your press kits. Sorry, and I hope that you can either comment or just subscribe to it. The press kit said that the Jesus Litter might not be young, but they will never ever get fucking old. Is that
Yeah, I like
something
that.
where you say the band is like a fountain of youth?
Well, it's I think in a certain way it that's a good quote. I like that one because it's yeah, I don't think that there's any reason to do like you were saying earlier, to become elder statesmen
Mm,
or become matured versions of what you once were, or having to prove to people that you can go beyond this or that. Or I just think, you know, our band would rather be authentic
mm,
and just do what naturally comes without thinking about it. And I think that's what we do really well is just whatever we do when we get together, that's the sound we make. And there's not a
mm,
lot of, you know, there's not a lot of worry about what's it going to sound like, or we need to do it this way or that way. So we're very lucky in that way. It's just like we know we have a thing, and it sounds like what it sounds like whenever we get together. And we even know that we can all individually tell that sounds like us. And it's a great thing to have like an identity that way, musically speaking,
mm,
that you don't have to try so hard to achieve, or worry about it going off the rails or this way or that way. I think some songs are a little bit different uh, than on the new record than in the past, but they're still within what we sound
mm.
like,
Yeah,
naturally. So
definitely, definitely. Mac, thanks for all the insight into the new record and into the process, but nobody leaves a Veil of Sound interview, not even Mr. McNeilly leaves a Veil of Sound interview, without having to go through the infamous quickfire round at the end. You will always get two alternatives, like CBGB's versus Whiskey A Go Go, or Brian Scott, Bon Scott versus Brian Johnson, something like that. And you
okay,
have to decide on one of them and give a short explanation for your choice.
okay,
I'll start with one of the persons that I would venture to say are like also in a way responsible for the Jesus Lizard sound, and that is the late Steve Albini. So I'll give you two of his bands, Big Black versus Shellac. Which one would you rather put on right now?
shellac, because
Or
they're an actual band, and I have an appreciation for the stuff Steve did with Big Black, but they're completely different things.
Mhm.
And I just prefer musicians looking at each other and playing with each other.
Mhm. Again, if my research was correct, when you took part in the Kate Bush cover some several years ago, so I'll give you two Kate Bush songs, not songs, albums. The
Okay.
Hounds of Love versus 50 Words for Snow.
Well, that one I truly can say you can pick one for me because I don't know much about Kate Bush at all, and I
But you
honestly don't.
but you did a cover of Kate Bush, didn't you?
Yes, yes, I played on Coffee Homeground, and I like that song.
Yeah.
The but I and besides one song called "Running Up That Hill," which I know was a
Mhm.
big hit,
Yeah.
I could not tell you any other Kate Bush songs. I just don't.
That
I don't
that's
didn't follow
very
her.
honest answer.
Yeah.
Um, Stepping back into music history, some decades ago, the Jesus Lizard had a split with Nirvana. So I'll give you two Nirvana records. In Utero versus Nevermind.
All right. Um, yeah, I don't know. They're both hit me about the same way, and it's funny
Okay.
because they were done differently, and
Yes.
one was done with Steve,
And
and
one
one
with Butch.
wasn't. Yeah,
Yeah.
one with Butch, and I like aspects of them both, but I
Mhm.
know you're trying to get me to commit to one. It's just that I kind of don't see them as like one or the other. They seem like
Mhm.
they're from two different universes almost.
That's true. That's true.
So, but let's
And it's
see.
also for me, if normally, Nevermind was one of my go-to records into music.
Uh,
But when listening to In Utero, it's just the more cohesive record. But I understand that. I understand
yeah,
that.
yeah, and I think that the Nevermind was played so much
Yeah.
you could not avoid it, even if you
Hmm.
weren't playing it at home. That it sometimes when a record, sometimes not always,
Overplayed, right?
sometimes it can feel that way, right? So
Yeah.
where you
Yeah.
need a break from it, even though you haven't put it on yourself. It's in the collective consciousness, you know.
Yeah, that's true. Um, I take a quote by Dwayne as the starting point for the next one
Okay.
because Dwayne said about the Motor song on your new record that
Uh,
it's neither Motorhead nor Radiohead. So you have to choose.
oh, if I had to choose between both of those,
Yeah, and I'll throw in a third one. The Talking Heads.
uh, well, I like the grit of Motorhead,
Mm-hmm.
but and I like the adventurousness of Radiohead,
Mm-hmm.
but and what was the third one?
The Talking Heads.
The Talking Heads. um, I've never been a big fan of any of those three, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and it's not because I dislike them so much,
Mm-hmm.
but what I've heard doesn't really get me going very much.
Mm-hmm.
But I know I have, a couple of the guys in our band and then Jesus Lizard really like Motorhead. But at least certain songs, but like that's one of those that just kind of flew past me without me
Mm-hmm.
seeing it go by. I, I I
Mm-hmm.
I know some of the songs. I know Ace of Spades and all, and some of these,
Yeah.
well-known songs. But like,
Yeah.
and Lemmy's History and Hawkwind, and I know all that stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I don't. I just never really wanted to listen to that
Mm-hmm.
when, uh, and again, not because it's bad or because I think it's no good or anything like that. It's just it didn't really do it for me. And the
Mm-hmm.
Talking Heads are the same way. It didn't really do it for me.
Mm-hmm.
And I know they were wildly popular. And Radiohead, I haven't listened to that much stuff because they've been very prolific in the last, decade.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and they've changed so much than when they first came on with that song Creep that I don't even know what they're doing. I know they're at least being adventurous. So I would
Yeah.
say I admire that part about them. And they're
Mm-hmm.
very artistic in their
Yeah.
decision making with music. And I know Johnny Greenwood's doing film stuff. And I know about all this stuff,
Mm-hmm.
but
Yeah. Yeah.
I just musically, I don't really invest much time in like listening to Radiohead or Motorhead or Talking
Mm-hmm.
Heads.
Yeah.
And Talking Heads was overplayed when I was growing up.
Yeah.
When they were around, it was like take me to the river. No, don't do that again. I've been to the river. I've heard you at the river many times.
Mhm,
Don't do that.
mhm.
So, stuff like that. But there's nothing wrong with David Byrne and, whatever, Psycho Killer. I know they were an important part of the CBGB scene, and I know all the history, but
Yeah,
musically, they just did not really like tickle me.
it's probably, I would say with all three bands, they share one thing. If you haven't been around when they ignited,
Hmm.
it's hard to get into them.
That's a very good point, and I would probably agree with you because I think that's a very big part of why they are a reference point
Mm,
now, is that how they came on, how they grabbed everybody's attention, and how they didn't sound like anyone else at the
mm,
time. So it was just as much a product of or a consequence of their place in history, even though that may not have been what they were trying to do. It was like the context of when
yeah,
that music came onto the
yeah,
scene.
exactly.
Yeah.
I have three more for you. I'll give you first
Okay, go.
something to
Yeah,
relate to your
I'm
Atlanta roots.
okay.
The I mean, like you probably grew up on Southern rock, I guess so, right? So the Allman Brothers
Yes.
versus Leonard Skinner.
Uh, I'd have to say Allman Brothers
Mhm.
easily, especially the first two records, the Allman Brothers and Idlewild South. Those two records alone are great, even though everyone loves Live at Fillmore East, and that's fine. But like the first two records they did have some
Mhm.
of the best playing on there, and it's not just redneck music. Believe me,
No, 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 it's
there's
not.
a lot of depth to it, and to play that way with two drummers also is phenomenal. It's just incredible.
Mhm.
The way that they had an intuition about how each other
Yeah,
was, what the other people in the band were doing at any given moment, and how they interacted. It was almost like a group of jazz musicians that really hear each other, but in a rock context, in a Southern rock context. Now, I do think Leonard Skinner had some excellent songs, but
yes.
uh, I like Simple Man and I Need You from the
Freebird.
second helping. Those
Yeah.
are great. And the
Mhm.
guitar, some of the guitar playing in Leonard Skinner is fantastic for that style. I think Southern rock is just really, really good.
Would you agree that Skinner is a hit band while the Allman Brothers is a records band?
I don't know because maybe, but I think Leonard Skinner was known more for their hits,
That's
probably.
true.
But I think they also had some good songs that weren't maybe quite as popular.
Mm.
Um, but I have heard from Al Cooper, who is one of the guys producing the Leonard Skinner first record. He said that those guys were so good that they could do take after take after take, and they all sounded the same to him. And they would go, well, no, we played it a little bit different this time. He said they were so good at just they
Mm.
knew their parts so well, and they could just
Mm.
play. They just played with each other. But then
Mm.
again, Allman Brothers were the same way.
Mm.
They had that trust built in.
Mm.
But anyways, that's a long explanation
No,
for
no, no,
that
no, no, no. I like that. I like that. I love nerding out about music. Second to last.
Okay.
I guess that none of both are real role models to you, but whose drumming did you like more? Buddy Rich versus John Bonham?
Oh, John Bonham for sure, because
Mhm.
uh, he, John Bonham's drumming makes sense to me because it came along at a time also when I was just learning the drums and I
Mhm.
was uh, so keyed into what he was playing
Mhm.
and trying to, take it apart and then
Mhm.
put it back together again. Buddy Rich is probably one of those guys that nobody's going to be on that level of that style of playing.
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
think it's like here, I've got a drumstick right here. They say that like Buddy Rich was here, and everybody else was about here on down, and
Mm,
no one was up in here near him. And that may be true. He was kind of like a very unusual drummer in that way, and
mm,
his his technical ability is really pretty mind blowing. But I'm not sure that that's the same thing as being in an ensemble like a band and contributing. Like he was a featured player, no matter
mm.
where he was, in what
Yeah.
context. And like with John Bonham, he was able to have his own voice within a group of individuals who each had their own voice that was equally important and had a different function and much more pared down being in a setting like that where you have bass, guitar, and drums.
Mm.
And so John Bonham, I wouldn't say is better than or worse than Buddy Rich, completely different, can't even
Yeah.
compare them, but I identify with John Bonham, so
Mhm.
he's more of a hero to me.
And the last one, as it's getting late in Chicago, what would you prefer for dinner? A rack of lamb or a goat stew?
Well, you're only giving me these two choices, so I
Yeah,
have to
there is
have
no
to.
flux meat.
Yeah, yeah. Let's see. Well, um, I would try the goat stew. I would try the goat stew because I've only had goat once or twice in my life, and when I tried it, I thought it was pretty good.
It is. I also think so.
Yeah,
It
I
just
had
needs
that.
time. It
Yeah,
just needs time.
I remember having that in Yugoslavia before it was broken up into the different parts back
Mhm.
in the early 90s.
One thing that I can say, I mean, like goat stew takes time. It needs a lot of patience. Something that doesn't need a lot of time for everybody out there is Wreck and Flux. The last two releases by the Jesus Lizard. Both amazing. It doesn't sound as if there's 20 years patience in between. Um, Mac, thanks for your time and thanks for the detailed answers. That's very much a pleasure to me to also tick it off my bucket list.
Well,
Enjoy the
thank you
rest
so
of your
much.
evening.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, and I enjoyed this thoroughly. And any other time you want to do this, even if it's not, something that gets aired, we can nerd out about music anytime.
We can. So
Okay.
enjoy the rest of your evening.
Okay. Thanks so much, Thorson.
Bye.